Good evening and welcome to this Wednesday, November 23rd, 2011 broadcast of the Infowars Nightly News. I'm Aaron Dyke sitting in. Alex will be back next week, and we have special programming tomorrow and Friday during the American Thanksgiving holiday. Tonight in the news, what we were told was the first ever devastating cyber attack on an Illinois water pump was apparently not. According to Paul Joseph Watson's report, the DHS advisor hastily told the Washington Post the incident was a foreign cyber attack, despite the lack of any evidence. And it goes on to describe how the DHS and FBI officials have confirmed that they have discovered no evidence of cyber intrusion or any other malicious activity by foreign or domestic actors. This marks a stark contrast to reports last week, which focused around the alarmist rhetoric of Homeland Security Advisor Joe Weiss, who told the Washington Post, "This is a big deal. It was tracked to Russia. It has been in the system for at least 2 to 3 months. It's caused damage. We don't know how many other utilities are currently compromised." Meanwhile, the actual cyber attacks under the Stuxnet worm were directed by the U.S. and Israel. Meanwhile, there are tensions heating up with Russia as Medvedev is apparently angry over continued plans to launch the missile defense system in Romania and Poland, which it sees as a threat and an escalation towards war, but the U.S. claims is merely to fend off a potential threat from Iran. Now, that's been going on for several years, but it comes at a time when Russia's put warships near Syria and in the general proximity of the Middle East as tensions for war there escalate. So we hope this is all just more saber-rattling, but you never know. At the same time, it appears that sort of tension has appeared in the Russian press. We've got a clip here of a reporter who seems to be flipping off Obama during a report.
Дмитрий Медведев стал сегодня председателем Организации Азиатско-Тихоокеанского экономического сотрудничества. Ранее этот пост занимал американский президент Барак Обама. На пресс-конференции по итогам форума, который прошел в столице Гавайи в Гонолулу.
And that's during coverage of APEC, where obviously Obama and the other American diplomats are trying to reinforce and exert their pressure over the Pacific area. They put in new bases in the Pacific Rim and are trying to menace even China there. Meanwhile, a war crimes tribunal in Malaysia has found former President George W. Bush and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair guilty of war crimes for their role in the Iraq War and all the dubious, malicious lies that took us there, all the lies about WMDs and a whole lot more. But don't hold your breath. I wouldn't expect to see them in jail. That's a political definition. Nonetheless, we have video of this.
U.S. President George Bush and his former counterpart Tony Blair were found guilty of war crimes by the Kuala Lumpur War Crimes Tribunal, which held a 4-day hearing in Malaysia. The 5-panel tribunal unanimously decided that Bush and Blair committed genocide and crimes against peace and humanity when they invaded Iraq in 2003 in blatant violation of international law. The judge.
And, of course, it's prima facie, but that's not how they analyze these things. Instead, they're just going to start more wars, say it's for peacekeeping or humanitarian purposes. It's because the globalists have a hit list. It did include Iraq. It still includes Syria and Iran, among others. So that is in the war watch. Meanwhile, the European debt crisis continues to mount. Only days ago, Jim Grant, an economist, warned that the central banks are insolvent, and he pointed to the fact that the ECB, the European Central Bank, has expanded its balance sheets mightily under Trichet. I dare say Europe is going to print money. And then he goes on to describe how the European Central Bank has a ratio of non-AAA rated assets to equity of 14 to 1. That's 14 to 1 ratio of non-AAA rated assets to its actual equity. Meanwhile, the New York Fed is leveraged 100 to 1 and just goes on to describe all the problems that are going to come with more money printing in a vain attempt to save Europe from crisis. Of course, that will have many repercussions in the United States and around the world as well. Now, in just a moment, we're going to speak with Brandon Smith. He runs alt-market.com and other projects in the name of liberty, but he, among others, has been recently demonized by none other than the Southern Poverty Law Center. in their recent article, A Gathering of Eagles, Extremists Look to Montana, and it attempts to portray a tie-in between a number of neo-Nazis and supposed racists that they detail in this article, along with non-racist, pro-freedom, pro-constitution icons, including Stuart Rhodes, Chuck Baldwin, and many others, as well as Brandon Smith. And it's just the kind of typical demonization you expect to see. They specifically say Chuck Baldwin, a Baptist preacher who ran for president under the Constitution Party banner in 2008, moved 18 family members to Montana's Flathead Valley last fall after receiving what he called a divine message telling him the state was the tip of the spear in the fight for liberty. Then it goes on to bring up Stuart Rhodes, a Yale-educated lawyer, former Army paratrooper, and head of the conspiracy-minded Oath Keepers, also moved there, how he's laying the groundwork for a new militia and calling for citizens to adopt a barter economy to escape the bondage of U.S. currency. Then, without any break or context, it says neo-Nazi April Gade also transplants to the state and has issued a call for white nationalists to come home, quote unquote, to the Northwest. There is no relationship between these individuals, especially this neo-Nazi April Gade. Chuck Baldwin and Stuart Rhodes, on the other hand, I think do. Now, Brandon Smith has pointed out in his article what a joke this all is and how, yeah, people who stand up for principles, especially the Constitution, may appear to be extremists, but that doesn't bear any relationship to National Socialists who want gigantic government and authoritarian control versus people who want freedom. Now, he also points out how what they're really upset about is that people like Chuck Baldwin are running for office in the state. He is running for lieutenant governor, and we will talk about the other candidate who's attempting to run for governor in Montana. And so now for more on the SPLC's crosshairs on the state of Montana, we turn now to one of these extremists, Brandon Smith. He's the founder of the Alt Market Project, the Safe Haven Project, and works in many other ways for the cause of liberty. Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So why don't we get into this article and how they're trying to portray people seeking freedom and liberty in the state of Montana?
Well, really what we're dealing with is the SPLC, which poses as an organization determined to prevent racism or organizational racism, but really I see them as an extension, sort of a propaganda arm of the DHS now. I mean, they run a lot of the new training programs for police infusion centers across the country. Most of their rhetoric is based around not racism per se, but groups who are anti-state corruption. Anyone who opposes the establishment suddenly is lumped in with neo-Nazis, and that's really been their primary tactic for years. Is to anytime a group forms that's anti-corruption, anti-establishment, they write these hit pieces that lump us all in with neo-Nazis, extremists. They throw the term extremist around quite a bit. They never actually define what an extremist is in their articles, but if you go back to documents such as the MIAC report or the Virginia Fusion Center document, they tell you right there what they think an extremist is. It's anyone who puts a Ron Paul sticker on their bumper or returning veterans. Pretty much it's completely arbitrary. Anybody who they think might be a patriot, they automatically demonize.
Yeah, and just like George Orwell said, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth, the revolutionary act. So, of course, patriots who are talking about the Constitution will be viewed as extremists. But let's talk about that progression, because you mentioned the MIAC report, the Homeland Security reports, targeting returning veterans, targeting people who mention the Constitution or portray these logos from the revolutionary times and more. How has that shifted? Because they've really stuck with that theme and kind of beat the drum on that for many years. Now they're actually targeting protest groups from the left and the right.
Right. I think, as far as the MIAC report goes, that was the exposure of that was enormous, and we really, we created a lot of groundswell support for shutting that whole project down. Now the SPLC is coming back, and they're trying to they're calling for a reinstitution of all the guidelines that were within the MIAC report. I see very soon. We're seeing it in smaller cases, but very soon I see sort of a widespread effort on the part of not just the SPLC, but the DHS to begin implementing those profiling techniques against anyone who's anti-Fed, anti-establishment. So I think we're really on the verge of a move towards actual hardcore implementation of those profiling guidelines.
Now let's talk about the state of Montana in particular and why the SPLC has put focus on that area, because you've got a lot of well-known patriots moving there, yourself, Stuart Rhodes, and now Chuck Baldwin, who's even going to run for lieutenant governor, right?
Yes. Bob Fanning and Chuck Baldwin are both running for the 2012 office in Montana, and I think Montana itself is sort of becoming a focal point for the movement, for the liberty movement, and I think that the SPLC has obviously noticed that, which is why they're producing these hit pieces now on a more regular basis, and they're focusing a lot on what we're doing. If you look at the SPLC's hate map, which is hilarious to me that they have a hate map, but they do. Go check it out. Montana actually ranks very low on their list of hates, or their spectrum of hate, and yet they focus so much energy and so much attention on Montana. And I think the reason for that is because there's a surge of liberty movement activity, which is not has nothing to do with racism. Obviously, we're all anti-Nazi. We hate National Socialists. But we're anti-corruption, we're anti-centralization, anti-establishment. So, what they don't want, what the SPLC doesn't want, and what the DHS doesn't want is for liberty movement people to stand up, walk away from their computers, leave their houses, and begin meeting face-to-face and organizing for mutual aid and mutual defense. They do not want that. They hate that. So I say, whatever the SPLC attacks or whatever the DHS attacks, we should keep doing that. Keep pushing that strategy. If they're afraid of it, then we should keep doing it.
And you hit the nail on the head right there in terms of the reversal of the portrayal of power grabs. They know the general public, if they hear this warning about extremists in Montana, won't know that neo-Nazi means someone who wants National Socialism, while they're always grabbing more and more federal power. So how could people who want liberty be part of that? But they know it's just a demonization tactic.
Exactly, and it's it's the same tactic that goes back for it's gone back for centuries. Anytime an elite minority comes into power, if they can't directly attack an opponent, they'll attack his character. If they can't debate you on fair ground, then they'll attack your character. They'll try to dismantle your character in the public eye, so that no one will listen to you. They'll call you insane. They'll call you a conspiracy theorist. They'll call you a racist. They'll call you a terrorist. It's anything to get the public to not listen to what you have to say, and that's what the SPLC has been all about for years.
So knowing what your other work also focuses on, just in closing, talk about why it's important to disengage from the system that's become predatory in so many ways, from food freedom to our civil rights and on down the list, abusing the Constitution and more. Talk about how you advise people to create their own systems.
Well, the primary strategy of globalization and of elitism is centralization, and centralization requires the removing of options from a system until the populace is left with only one, your option.